I Hate Politics is a podcast about a human activity we love to hate. I am Sunil Dasgupta. Climate change is not just about sea level rise. We are seeing increasing inland flash flooding in cities and counties, marooning cars, damaging homes, sometimes with fatal consequences. Last month, in July 2025, a Montgomery County Fire and Rescue Service truck became stuck in high waters that had flooded over the banks of Sligo Creek in Silver Spring. For decades, local jurisdictions have used FEMA flood zone maps for everything from land use planning to water rescues. FEMA maps have shaped home buying and insurance markets. But increasingly, flooding has happened in locations that are not on the FEMA maps. A study from the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments Transportation Planning Board comparing water-related road closures in Washington, D.C. region to the FEMA flood maps shows how outdated these maps are. Only 15% of flooding-related road closures in the region for the last 20 years can be found in the FEMA maps. The mismatch between FEMA flood maps and actual flooding is likely a larger problem affecting more than just the Washington, D.C. region. And all local governments need better mapping as they tackle more rain, wider floodplains, stormwater runoff from impervious surfaces, including housing and infrastructure. Catherine Raynone is a transportation resilience planner with the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments Transportation Planning Board and has been working on solutions. Stay with us to learn what she has found.
I Hate Politics is brought to you by UMBC's Political Science Program, where you'll learn to shape public policy, impact communities, and function at the center of modern society. Learn more at shadygrove.umbc.edu.
I Hate Politics is a podcast about our neighborhoods, workplaces, schools and streets, and our local governments as they function in diverse and democratic societies. This means our politics are messy, dirty, sometimes corrupt, with often self-serving politicians. But no matter how much we may hate politics, we are never exempt from it, even when we refuse to participate. In fact, the purpose of politics is to keep society functioning, precisely when we don't agree with each other, like now. Music for this episode comes from Washington, D.C. progressive rock band, A Shrewdness of Apes. Ian Mabley on vocals and guitar, Josh Pittman on bass, and J.R. Franks on drums. You can find their music at asoaband.com. Catherine Raynone, welcome to I Hate Politics.
Thank you. Good to be here.
We have a growing concern about flash floods in the Washington, D.C. region. You have just done a report on resilience planning for the Washington, D.C. region as part of the Transportation Planning Board, which is a part of the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments. I believe the regional maps are somewhat different from the FEMA maps, and there is some discrepancy. Can you speak to that? What is that? What areas are covered here but not there, and why?
The publicly available data for what we called temporary flooding is FEMA floodplain data. FEMA floodplain data is based on historical past flooding near rivers, creeks, and streams. They follow things like Rock Creek in Montgomery County, Sligo Creek. And so we used that, which is industry standard, to rank our transportation assets. And we worked with all of our member localities and our agencies, WMATA, VRE, and our state DOTs. A lot of folks were saying, hey, I know this spot in my locality floods. this particular bus stop or this particular road segment or this particular intersection, but it's not on this map. We need better information. And so we looked at a couple of different data sets, and the one that we chose to move forward with is called Fathom US Flood Map. What Fathom does is that's different than FEMA is that it takes into account rainfall, urban flooding, and it also looks at digital elevation. It uses LiDAR data, so that means it understands better than the original FEMA data, low points, high points, and where water would pool and flow. One thing that I am working on finalizing with our GIS team is this map of reported road closures due to flooding in the past almost 20 years. We overlap that with the FEMA floodplains, and of those reported road closures due to flooding in our region, only 15% of them were in a FEMA designated floodplain.
So Fathom is a private company and LiDAR is satellite data?
Yes, Fathom is a UK-based company, but they have US flood maps that we were able to acquire.
What are some standout differences?
In the Fathom analysis, 25% more road and highway miles, 7% more bus stops, 13% more rail stops, and 25% more rail line miles were at risk than in the FEMA analysis. For example, for bus stops in Montgomery County, in the FEMA-informed analysis, there was one bus stop that was marked as high risk, but in the Fathom-informed analysis, there were 16.
Are there particular areas within the COG region that local government should really be concerned about?
The urban areas that are more built up, have more paved areas, are generally showing up in our map as brighter red than some of our more rural areas, just because pavement does not absorb water.
You said that you could identify areas with increased vulnerability that were not visible to local jurisdictions. Do you have some examples of that?
Was it 2 weeks ago in Montgomery County in Silver Spring? So that intersection of East-West Highway and Sunderland I saw an image of a car submerged on that intersection, and it just so happened that I could read the exact cross streets on the photo. And so I was curious. I went to our newly updated mapping tool, put the intersection in, and looked at the map for the FEMA original analysis that we did, and that intersection showed as blank. It was not showing as at risk at all. And then when I turned on the layers for the Fathom-informed analysis, that whole intersection showed as red. So that showed as a high risk score. And so what that tells me is that it's possible that the floodplain has expanded, or the Fathom model was able to pick up better digital elevation. So that is intersection seems to, based on that photo, seems to be a little bit lower than the rest of the streets. And so by having this updated information, these updated tools, folks like emergency managers, county administrators, stormwater engineers can look at this and they could flip the layers on and off and say, all right, maybe these are intersections when we know there's a heavy rainstorm coming through, we maybe route emergency vehicles around that, or we place signs that say road may flood, or you may think about clearing the stormwater drains before a storm comes through. Sometimes it comes through too quickly to do something like that, but it gives folks an idea, all right, this intersection is maybe more at risk than we originally thought. So let's take a look at it and come up with a plan.
Do you have any other specific examples like that? That's very, very illustrative, by the way.
I live in DC and I have a dog. The Rhode Island Avenue flooding events, they come up in my head a lot as indicative examples of urban flooding in our region. That location at Rhode Island Avenue is not on the FEMA maps, and it flooded twice, major floods in 2 consecutive years. And now they completed that stormwater management project there, and so that area on Rhode Island Avenue Northeast may no longer be an urban flooding issue. Another instance of a flash flooding event that did need to have a swift water rescue, which is like a rescue via a little boat on the road, was near the Pentagon, like near Army Navy Drive and Joyce Street in Arlington. We had noticed that the headline showed photos of flooding, and so I went to the maps and I turned on the original floodplain analysis, and it showed that particular intersection was not at risk. And then when I turned on the Fathom informed analysis, that intersection showed as high risk.
What is the thinking about what needs to be done?
Included in the Transportation Resilience Improvement Plan is a list of projects. We asked all of our localities and our member agencies to submit a list of projects so that we could have an idea of what are you guys planning? What are you looking for funding for? What are you including in maybe your capital improvement plan? A lot of the projects on the list are stormwater management projects, a lot of them.
Are transportation projects now more expensive as a result of this?
I don't know. That's a good question, but I'm not sure what the answer to it is.
Okay.
I think transportation projects are getting more expensive just in general, but I'm not sure.
But that's an interesting question as to, what happens to budgets now, because if a stormwater management subplan is attached to a roadway plan, then what does it do to the roadway? Does it make it shorter? I don't know. Can we talk a little bit about the natural hazard mitigation planning, especially around transportation between states and even local jurisdictions? What are you learning? What are some cool projects or even not so cool projects?
One project in particular that's happening in DC that recently got funded is a study of Nanny Helen Burroughs Avenue underneath the DC 295 underpass, which has really at risk for flooding. It's flooded many times in the past, and that whole neighborhood floods. It is within the FEMA floodplain. DDOT, with the help of DOEE, received a grant to further study that area and then come up with an implementation plan to improve flood resilience of the Nanny Helen Burroughs Avenue Northeast underpass between DC 295. And this is a critical roadway. It provides a critical access route for several surrounding historically disadvantaged neighborhoods that can be cut off during heavy rain events. Within our resilience improvement plan, there are a lot of studies that are proposed across sort of our various localities and agencies, again, doing similar stuff to this Nanny Helen Burroughs Avenue project. I also want to mention one other regional effort. There's also a regional body called the Northern Virginia Regional Commission. It's like COG, but just for the Northern Virginia area. And they have a resilience planner there she's incredible. And she has recently implemented a couple of new projects. And one of them is this rain gauge platform. And so this project that she worked on was a result of having a meeting with so similar to our subcommittee meetings where various localities, the resilience planners from around the region are all in the same room. They're talking about extreme rainfall. They're talking about swift water rescues that they've had to do on roadways in the past. And they were all talking about trying to understand better preparation or advanced warning of a particular potential event. And one of the things that they started talking about were rain gauges. They measure how much rain is coming through. She had a couple folks in the room together from different jurisdictions that were using rain gauges that were operated by the same company. And they didn't know that the various localities were using these rain gauges. And so Nora was like, well, let's get a network together. You guys are all using the same company. Let's put them together. And so through this regional effort where folks are sort of sitting around the same table, Nora now was able to put together this map. It's called the NVRC Regional Rain Gauge Platform. It's NOVA Flood Map. It has a ton of rain gauges here, all coordinated across Northern Virginia. And so she was saying once where she was kind of watching a storm go through on what was showing up on these different rain gauges. And to me, that is the pinnacle of regional collaboration and coordination, where you get people in the same room together who wouldn't have normally been in the same room, talking about something, and then taking it from concept to putting it all together and saying, hey, here's now this platform that we can look at and understand better the impacts to the region. And then we can sort of go from there on what we do next. But everything is now coordinated and together in one map.
That's wonderful. Is the platform also connected to Rescue?
I'm not sure. This is a pilot project. They just put it together.
I would imagine if you can track rain in real time like that, and as rainstorms are moving, that if it pings in the fire station, that would be helpful.
Yeah, I think these things are just sort of starting to make it up the chain with regards to emergency management. I think recently someone from DC Fire and EMS emailed me and said, "Oh, we're interested in this map. Can you tell us more?"
What cross-jurisdictional cooperative projects are you seeing, particularly?
The COG, Department of Environmental Programs, is working on this. It's called the Regional Blue-Green Infrastructure Flood Project. And the jurisdictions that are involved in that are DC and Prince George's County. We, COG, are working with DC and Prince George's County. The project aims to increase resilience in 3 sub-watersheds that span DC and Prince George's County, which is the Watts Branch and Arundel Canal of the Anacostia River, and then Oxen Run, which is part of the Potomac River watershed. Mm-hmm. And so this is a pretty big project that they're working together closely with the various communities that are involved. They are looking at communities in flood-prone areas to identify potential blue-green infrastructure projects that can assist in the mitigation of flood impact. Through community-driven efforts, the project sought to develop a regional framework to reduce flood risk, provide stormwater capabilities, and increase recreational green space. And potentially, this project can serve as something that might be able to be replicated throughout the region. The other project that I was thinking of is called the Military Installation Resilience Review. It is a DoD program that looks at the resilience of military installations and the communities. And so while it's not exactly 2 different jurisdictions, the military installation and the community that shares a fence line with it could be considered 2 different localities. While a base might be located in the District of Columbia or in Maryland, it's federal property.
Do you know where exactly they are focusing on?
At Northern Virginia, NVRC has done, we call them MIR, Military Installation Resilience Review, looking at the bases in Northern Virginia. And then the Washington, D.C. Military Installation Resilience Review assesses 4 DoD installations within D.C. And so that's ABAB, Joint Base Anacostia Bowling, the Naval Research Laboratory, the Washington Navy Yard, and then Fort Leslie J. McNair, aka Fort McNair. So those are the 4 installations included in the DC MIR.COG.
Yeah, that's all the major ones.
All the major ones, yeah.
Extreme heat and wind, which are also part of your resilience plan. What are you finding in those issues?
We were focused on flooding last year. And this year, I just received a proposal to begin a project on studying the impacts of heat on the regional transportation system. So maybe you'll have me on next year to talk about the results of that study. Generally, what I'm looking to understand with that project is how is heat affecting the users of transportation, mainly transit users, to get from point A to point B. And the point A to point B that we're interested in looking at is access to critical infrastructure, emergency services, things like that. Is it too hot for folks to get to school or to the doctor?
But not to work.
Yeah, to work also, sure. Definitely to work. And are the commutes taking longer? The standard data set that we use when we're looking at heat is average land surface temperature, which can tell you where the surface is going to be the hottest. And it's usually where there are less trees. Someone that I have discussed this project with in the Boston region is doing this really interesting study, coming up with a different methodology for understanding, yes, where it's the hottest, but also where that intersects with where people are using active transportation the most.
Will transportation planning take into account trees much more? In the past, if you wanted to build a road, you cut the tree and just build the road. Because of this heat impact, do you think transportation planning needs to be more cognizant of forest conservation?
The state DOTs manage the tree canopy in the right of way in DC, and so MWCOG has a regional tree canopy goal, and that goal is 50%. And there's a subcommittee, and they talk about that all the time. I know WMATA is work on tree plantings and trying to increase the tree canopy near their stations in order to provide more shade.
Is there an approach that they will cut what they need to and plant elsewhere, which is the way that typically development is dealt with the problem? Or are they trying to route around tree cover?
I don't know the answer.
What are your takeaways on wind?
The impact of wind in our region is that it downs trees. And so wind was not a hazard that we originally included in our first round of the vulnerability assessment. But when we presented our initial draft, some of the rail folks, they said one of the main issues that they're seeing with regards to resilience are downed trees on their tracks. Having a better understanding of the tree canopy along their rail line and where potentially wind could affect those trees falling onto the rail line will be able to allow those rail operators to provide better and more consistent service to their customers.
So here's the tension, right? You want to clear the railway line or the roads. You want to make sure that there are no dead trees or old trees that are likely to fall. So you probably want a wider clearance alongside your transportation asset. So now you've cut down a bunch of trees.
I don't know if that's standard practice.
One would imagine that happens. And then, you come up on the heat issue. How is transportation planning going to have to balance those things?
That's what I would hope that our vulnerability assessment would help. If you have all of the layers on, you can see where the average surface temperature is the most. You can see the tree canopy. You can see this layer of wind. You can see parts of the track or the station are at most risk to flooding or heat or whatnot, what the scores are. And so you can prioritize it based on the location. COG isn't an implementation body, and so we can provide our member agencies with the information that they may need in order to make the best decisions for their particular asset.
Catherine Rhinone, thank you for taking the time to explain flooding, extreme heat, and wind in the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area. Please come back as you have more information.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for having me.
See, hard to explain if you don't believe, makes itself known in the dark, leaves your heart racing cold and stark.
That's all for this episode of I Hate Politics, where we aim to stem the decline in local news by working with community voices. Don't forget to tune in to our Tuesday morning news analysis. I Hate Politics is produced by me, Sunil Dasgupta, with support from the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. I direct UMBC's political science program at the universities at Shady Grove in Montgomery County, where, among other things, we explore and learn about politics, government, and society close to home. Music for this episode comes from Washington, D.C. progressive rock band A Shrewdness of Apes. Ian Mabley on vocals and guitar, Josh Pittman on the bass, and J.R. Franks on drums. You can find their music at asoaband.com. If you want to share your music on the show or know someone else who might want to, please email us at producer@ihbpod.org. I hope you will subscribe and share the podcast as we bring you stories about politics close to you and to your home. See you next time.